on drugs gets off to a shaky start because there is no war on an inert substance. So it's really enacted as a war on nature and a war on human beings. Aerial phosphate spraying has been credited with both health and disease issues in local populations in South America, where taxpayer money has been spent from planes spray toxic chemicals to destroy coca plantations. So we have poison in the natural ecologies that matter most on the planet, in our rainforests, and abuse of indigenous people. The war on drugs, as it's played out as the war on American individuals, is slanted to exacerbating racial tensions and reenacting racial abuse cycles as African American youth are disproportionately targeted. It's also a war on the economy. It's a war on the well-being of American citizens as money is spent from the economy to imprison people and take them out of the economy as both producers and consumers. And the ban on a substance deletes the government's ability to regulate it and tax it. So if you have aspirin, the government is getting a sales tax cut, and is also getting other peripheral taxes around every aspirin consumed. If you make aspirin illegal, first of all, the need for aspirin doesn't go away, so you create a criminal underground, much like was done in Prohibition. And it's useful to go back to Prohibition because what we saw was hundreds of % increase in the amount of speakeasies. These were purveyors of liquor, an illegal substance. So when liquor became illegal, there were fewer bars and dispensaries of liquor than there were at the end of Prohibition. So you saw an explosion of vending. You saw an infusion of money into the Italian mafia, creating a very lucrative underground and increasing violence. You saw an increase in liquor consumption, and the government, which went to war on its people in that situation, spent taxpayer money while denying itself taxpayer revenue for a substance, in this case, liquor or alcohol. So this is the pattern which we tried it with Prohibition. It didn't work. And in an education system that doesn't teach us the fundamental principles that we can learn from history, positive and negative, around the world, in our country and beyond our borders, but rather reframes history as a recitation of facts. That is the most meaningless part of history. We fail to grasp what was already taught us with Prohibition, that war on a substance, that banning a substance that people want doesn't work. And we repeat it again, in this case, misnaming it a war on drugs. It's really a war on American culture, on American freedoms, on American individuals, and on the U.S. economy. The war on drug is estimated to cost the taxpayer $42 billion a year, according to WikiLeaks, or according to Wikipedia. And it is estimated that were all substances made legal, regulated and taxed, that the increase in purity and safety to the public would go up significantly, and that there would be another 42% revenue in taxes on the substances that currently can't be taxed because they're illegal. So we're doing the same thing. We're creating a criminal underground. We're disproportionately targeting African Americans. We're also, in the war on the American people and the American economy, failing to focus on the fact that addiction is a medical issue that is best responded to with a medical paradigm. Portugal, which decriminalized all drugs and put the attention on treating addiction as a medical issue, has seen simultaneously a decrease in drug consumption, an increase in safety, a reduction in crime, and has stopped attacking and destroying the families within its borders. The war on drugs, which was begun by Richard Nixon in an effort to break up feminists and African American hippies who were against the war on Vietnam. In one of the memos with a Nixon aide, the aide talked about the brainstorming session, which went something like this: we can't arrest them for being black. We can't arrest them for being progressive. We can't arrest them for being Democrats. We can't arrest them for wanting world peace. But it seems like these groups that want these progressive agendas are consuming marijuana, LSD, magic mushrooms, and DMT, substances that have been used for, in most cases, thousands of years, other than LSD, that have high therapeutic potential and which are leading to a break with the autocratic status quo of a military dictatorship, burning men, women, and children alive in Vietnam, setting fire to a country with napalm while we're in an environmental crisis. That the people who are taking these substances are the most anti-Nixon, anti-Vietnam people. So let's reclassify plants as toxic substances, even though other cultures have used them freely for thousands of years, and consider them vital parts of initiation, spirituality, and growth. Let's reframe science and let's suppress the entire psychedelic movement by arresting and terrorizing its members so that they cannot put up a cohesive front against Vietnam. So we have an attack, the healthiest members of the culture, who are exploring consciousness with faulty science, with tyranny, with lies, and the abuse of people with their own tax dollars. This has seen a tremendous harm being directed to U.S. service troops as psychedelic research on the therapeutic value of MDMA, LSD, psilocybin, DMT being an endogenous product produced by the brain that is responsible for many of the transcendent experiences and revelatory experiences human consciousness is capable of self-generating in mystical states of meditation, etc. This criminalizing of consciousness, this criminalizing of chemicals within one's own brain, this criminalizing of nature, to where Native Americans Incas, indigenous people all around the world have more freedom to relate to their natural environment than Americans today as a result of a misapplication of taxpayer money. Because when you abuse trillions of dollars of taxpayer money, because the war on drugs has cost, just the war on American people has cost well over $1 trillion. But the loss in the economy to locking up more people per capita, many for nonviolent drug offenses, than any country in the world, to locking up millions of Americans and taking them out of the economy. We might consider this a $4 to $10 trillion cost to the economy. Attacking the American people, poisoning aspects of the environment and indigenous peoples around the world, building up military dictatorships in South America, fueling the very terrorism we say that we now want to have a new war, which is a war on a feeling. It's insane to have a war on a substance. It's just as insane to have a war on a feeling. But the war on drugs has not only spent and removed $10 trillion from the economy, it has broken up homes. It has severely destroyed the cohesiveness of American families. And by misinformation, we have avoided the priceless opportunity to conduct a war not on drugs, not on people, but on pain and the environment that produces a chronic level of pain so high that American citizens have been wanting to escape their reality for decades. Gabor Mate pointed out that the addictive conclusions from lab mice and lab rats are wrong. Because if you take a population of highly repetitively bred mice or rats and put them under floodlights, surrounded by sociopathic scientists who think nothing of killing them, in cages, out of sync with their natural environment, you are testing a traumatized population of animals that have been sadistically bred to be traumatized. When you induce that amount of cruelty into a population, they will willingly kill themselves with drug overdoses to escape the cruelty of the scientists who are trying to kill them. And we mistakenly read that data to say that drugs are inherently addictive and you can't do anything about it, that it's the drug that is the problem. However, when you conduct studies with healthy, wild-grown mice and rats in empathic environments, delete the sociopathic scientists, delete the floodlights, delete the cages, and you instead allow healthy mammals that have survival, security, love, and belonging in their natural environment, and you give them the choice to eat healthy natural foods or kill themselves with drugs, they may or may not take an occasional hit, but they do not kill themselves with drugs because they have healthy alternatives. The message in this data is that the American culture is so sick with childhood abuse, with a sociopathic government, with the radical priesthood of materialist, meaningless science, the whole hypothesis, which is in the 10,000 cultures in human history that anthropologists estimate have occupied this planet. Radical, reductionist, materialistic science is the only cult, the only priesthood, which on faith posits that there is no meaning to consciousness, that consciousness itself may be an illusion, that your life is utterly meaningless, and that there's nothing beyond hedonism for a meaning of life. When you infect the mind with this limiting scope of reality, and it is pretty arrogant to be the one cult in 10,000 that not only acknowledges the tremendous competency and value of science and rationality and material, but that goes beyond that into faith, into priesthood, to preach that if there is no proof of something bigger than ourselves, of consciousness and of meaning, it should not be taken seriously. That the most important parts of being human should be discounted and disbelieved until a scientist who believes, who has faith that there is nothing more, successfully proves that their own theories are meaningless because the consciousness that produced their theories doesn't really exist and has no purpose. It's fascinating that materialist, rationalist, reductionist, faith-based scientists, that atheists write books about it because they're saying everything inside my mind is a random, meaningless chance, and there's nothing more, and it's all going to die when I turn into dust in a few years. However, now that we've established that everything inside my brain is completely irrelevant and worthless, you should spend money to buy my worthless book that came out of my worthless brain from a consciousness that doesn't exist. It's a very shaky supposition, and yet these radical atheist materialists are grasping frantically. Listen to me, my consciousness makes no sense. I'm a meaningless machine. Listen to me. Why? Why should we listen to you? So you have, a certain absurdity on that level as well, but this absurdity creates pain. It's painful to have a meaningless life. It's painful to have a sociopathic government arresting you, breaking up your freedoms, etc., for your own good. It's painful to have a broken home that was broken by your government, ostensibly to protect you from someone that took a few puffs of marijuana. It's painful to be racially targeted. So the real war on the aspects of the culture that create chronic pain to a level that the American people would turn to drugs to avoid. It all ties together. A crappy education program, a sociopathic military, a corrupt government that lies. These are painful things. The addictive drugs, the opioids, which happen to be legal, the addictive drugs that manage pain are not desired by populations who are not in pain. The more traumatized the population in a traumatically illiterate culture, the more pain there is. The more unanswered pain, the more addiction there is. The more addiction there is in response to pain, be it addictive thinking, addictive feeling, addictive working, addictive busyness, addictive eating, addictive spending, addictive racing, anything that is designed to narrow the consciousness to avoid pain. One of those things is going to be numbing drugs. Both legal and illegal doesn't matter. The question is, does it work? Does it take my mind away from the chronic pain? Now, what does the war on pain look like? Because that's what we really want. What does a war on pain look like? Well, first of all, you have to take it a little step further. You don't declare war on a feeling. Feelings are symptoms of an environment. So what does a war on the most painful aspects of our environment look like? Well, this is a revolution to change culture. Every human being in the history of humanity has had a hierarchy of needs to survive. Well, in America, there are millions of people on the edge of survival. 1 in 50 children under a legal age runs away from home because the amount of shame and abuse is so high that they'd rather give up free rent and food to go out alone illegally than stay in that level of abusive environment. That's pain for you. 1 in 50 actually runs away. 1 in 10 thinks about it. It's that bad. 2, to be put through a mind-numbing education protocol. You see, you go to school and mom's being beaten up at home. So you're very distracted because you're wondering how you're going to survive, how you're going to feel secure, how you'll have any sense of love and belonging if one of your parents is dead or beaten up. Who's going to be beaten up today by the 1 in 7 Americans who has a substance addiction? And your teacher asks you to ignore all of that data. You're worrying about survival in a culture that does not protect you as a child. And your teacher is asking you to learn see, cat, run. Is that painful or what? What if your teacher asked instead for a show of hands of who was scared that day? A show of hands of who had been beaten and was vulnerable to being beaten? What if the class talked about intergenerational abuse cycles? You see, now we start to see a little bit of sanity. And class attendance goes up because it's actually relevant to well-being. Interest levels go up. I'm not being asked to ignore real pain and trauma to talk about a fake dog running. See, spot, run. It has nothing to do with my life today. But how am I going to handle Dad's rage when I get home and I have to decide whether I take the beating and stand in front of him and Mom or not? How am I going to do that? You see, that would be useful education. As you have more relevant and useful education, your pain goes down. Pain is the separation from and longing for something. If you don't want it at all and you're separate from it, there's no pain. If you want it and it's there, there's no pain. But if you want a sense of control in your life and you have complete powerlessness, you're in pain. If you want a whole body and half of it's cut off, you're in pain. If you want sanity and you're surrounded by schizophrenic bullshit, you're in pain. If you want a healthy and beautiful future and it looks bleaker and bleaker by the role models around you, you're in pain. So, responding to pain is moving the culture closer towards what is longed for: survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem, the development of gifts, the integration of those gifts into reality, and transcendence, the participation in something bigger than ourselves. As we do this, pain levels go down. It's called a self-actualized individual. An individual who survives, is secure in that survival, has high amounts of love and belonging, has high amounts of self-esteem, is developing their abilities and has developed their talents, has brought those and is bringing more of those abilities and talents to enrich their community, and is a part of something bigger than themselves, is a person with low levels of pain. And they are not a candidate for highly addictive drugs. So, if we actually target the real issue, what are the forces in the American culture that destroy survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem, and the development of gifts? We go a long way to conducting the war on unnecessary suffering. And where do we deal with that? Well, we start focusing on homelessness. Millions of Americans are not in security around survival. We take off the shame of poverty. We take off the shame of poverty so that in a capitalist hierarchical system where there are guaranteed to be people at the bottom, we don't punish people for ending up in a statistical position that we created with the paradigm. Capitalism requires winners and losers. So if capitalism is really that great, you've got to honor your winners and you've got to honor your losers, because without one, there isn't the other. You don't punish and pile on the shame that you were the one in the musical chairs game that didn't have a seat. You see, the game determines that. If there's 20 people playing musical chairs and there's only 19 chairs, the game says that 1 out of 20 has to be a loser. And the only question is which one. Now, why should you play such a game if when you happen to be the one left standing when the music stops, you are heaped with shame and cruelty rather than honored for being a player in what is partly a game of luck, partly a game of statistics? If you play the game 100 times, there's only 19 chairs and there's 20 people, odds are pretty good you're going to be left standing one of those times. So, investing in emotional literacy, investing in psychology, investing in the science of well-being. How about this for an idea? What about sending an email or an app alert to every American citizen every single week saying, how are you doing? We want to know. We value you. How are you doing financially, emotionally, mentally, sexually, socially, and physically? How are you doing? And you rank 1 to 10 how you're doing, and you list what the problems are where you're not doing well, and you suggest the solution, and the app, or the human beings, if we want to do it the old-fashioned way, correlates patterns and presents a weekly summary of national well-being with the message that your well-being matters. Might your sense of value go up? Might your pain go down? It's absolutely free. The internet is free. Apps are free. We've all got phones. See, when you understand what it is you're really fighting, you're fighting sociopathic elements in the environment that are producing high levels of pain. You're not fighting incompetent pain management strategies that are, by definition, the best strategies your population knows how to deal with. Every human being throughout the history of the species has wanted to feel sustainably good and to avoid feeling chronically bad. If we are doing something, even something addictive, at one point, we thought starting out on that road was the best odds of increasing our well-being. Now, maybe it is because we don't expect there to be a decent future. We saw Dad get locked up. We understand the justice system is profoundly unfair. We understand recent generations have trashed our environment. Robots and AI taking over the economy without any backup plan doesn't look very good. The air is becoming more toxic. I don't really want to live. So if you don't really want to live because you're not anticipating a beautiful future, maybe starting off with a destructive and addictive drug regime is a way to speed up the end so you won't be there for the nightmare you anticipate. The medicine for that is not attacking human beings for digesting the horror of the future we have prepared for them. The medicine is creating compelling versions of the future based on substantive facts that make people want to live, and then educating them on the cost-benefit analysis of every human behavior, using real science to the best of our abilities. The final stupidity in the war on drugs is that the campaign on misinformation and outright lies, the falsification of science, making scientific grants. For example, the British government hired a statistician to show the danger of magic mushrooms. And the statistician did a number of calculations of incidence of magic mushroom consumption and fatalities. And so a statistician needs to look at relative samples. And what the statistician found and published was that horseback riding, a national pastime in Britain, was 300 times more likely to kill you or severely injure you than consuming magic mushrooms. That was the scientific fact. He was fired for sharing this with the press because it went against the political correctness. In order to waste vast sums of public money on a war on drugs, which is really a war on human beings, which is really a disproportionate war on the poor, the miserable, and African Americans, you've got to come up with evidence that supports how horrible these drugs are. So If instead you find that the thing the government protects is a tradition and wants to encourage, horseback riding is 300 times more dangerous than this horrible thing that they've banned outright, where they will lock you up in a concrete box for your own good if you get anywhere near this substance. It doesn't fit the narrative. And so much like Richard Nixon ganged up on science and gave bribes to numerous scientists to create falsified danger studies. So they would give chimpanzees toxins and pretend it was a drug, and then measure the results of the toxins, and then say this is how fatal things were. Or do careful sample manipulations, or do 10 studies and publish the one study from a small sampling that had, some side effect that couldn't even be directly pinned on a substance, and then pin it on that substance. This is the way science is falsified for political ends every single day. So we paid for those faulty studies with public tax money. Richard Nixon didn't come out of his own pocket to delude the American people. We also paid the 1,000 times greater expense of arresting people based on falsified science. But more importantly, we have lost the trust in authority. Trust is a fundamental asset to any empathic partnering culture. To any sophisticated free culture, trust is one of the most valuable resources in the culture. To systematically put on display for every young person that we are liars willing to falsify science for our own political corrupt agendas that result in death and breakup of American homes is a picture so hideous that no informed young person wants anything to do with trusting the sociopaths, the grown-ups operating from their reptilian brain, destroying the country that they sought leadership positions to protect. When you destroy trust in authority, you increase violence, you increase disruption in the culture. And this is perhaps the most important legacy of a war that makes no sense on a substance that isn't fighting, is the broken trust and the missed opportunity to put trillions of dollars into making the quality of life, the survival, the security, the sense of love and belonging and self-esteem, and the development of talents in every American. It is a right. These are needs. They're not preferences. Abraham Maslow didn't do a study on the hierarchy of human preferences. These are fundamental needs that are cross-cultural. And every American has the right to survive, to feel secure, to have love and belonging at birth, to develop self-esteem, to have the opportunity to become someone that reflects their own ideals, and to develop their talent and contribute those gifts to their community in an honored role. When you give people the viable option of taking that path or destroying themselves with toxic substances, they choose the former. It's human nature. It's human tragedy, cruelty, and stupidity that we deny large sections of our populace a clear path to meeting their human needs to such a painful extent that many of them would secretly be relieved to have life be a little shorter, that lead more than 400,000 Americans to commit suicide, more than die in traffic accidents, that leads to a reduction in life expectancy around increased suicides, increased drug overdoses, as a way to manage pain. That in all the frenetic discourse about attacking a substance is not on the table for conversation.